So we've done a great job of creating a JavaScript for loop that dynamically creates some jQuery code for us. Now we're going to go back to that for loop and enhance its performance. But before we do, I have to go into a bit of a mini rant here. I am recording this tutorial in February 2012. As of this date, you have got a lot of people that are trying to learn JavaScript for the first time, because JavaScript is a really good skill set to have in the web designer, web developer workforce. These people that are going out and learning JavaScript for the first time, they're learning some JavaScript best practices that have been in place since JavaScript came into popularity in the late 90s. Those best practices have been going through a period of redefinement for the past 2 years for a lot of reasons, but these two books definitely have something to do with it. This first one here, JavaScript Patterns by Stoyan Stefanov, this one has really had a lot to do with the redefinement. JavaScript, The Good Parts by Douglas Crockford. Both of these books will teach you to be a better JavaScripter. They will teach you best practices and methods that you should invoke in your code immediately. If you are JavaScript newbie, I don't know if these are the first books I would recommend. Maybe not the second ones, but they're definitely the third and the fourth books. The point is, read these books at some point because they will make you a better JavaScripter. That being said, let us take some of the techniques that the books teach us and apply them to this code. Some of them I've already invoked. I just didn't talk about them, but I'm going to talk about them now. First, the variables. I created these variables using something called the single var pattern. And let me open up a blank document to illustrate on this. When you're first taught how to create variables, you're told to start with the var keyword, give the variable a name. I'm going to call this one me. I'm going to set it equal to something. I'll set it equal to 1, and then you end it with a semicolon. And you're taught to create all subsequent variables the same way. So var keyword, give it a name, I'll call it u, and I'll set it equal to 2, and end it with a semicolon. This is totally valid code, but the single var pattern is neater. The way that works is you use the var keyword once. So start off with var, create my variable, name it me, set it equal to 1, and I have to create more variables now. And instead of ending this line of code here with a semicolon, I'm going to add a comma. So I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to call that u, set it equal to 2. I create another variable. Call this variable us, set it equal to 3, and then create another variable called them, and then set it equal to 4. So I've created all of my variables using the var keyword once. Every time I create a new one, I add a comma. I comma separate my variables. And when I'm done creating my variables, then and only then do I end things with a semicolon. And that's pretty much what I've done here. All the variables are on one line, but that's totally fine. I think this is a neater way to read things. So everything's got a comma here, and the very, very last variable ends in a semicolon. So that's a single var pattern. Actually, you know what? This isn't in the book, but it's definitely something you should know. It's with regards to this all lms variable, which we created. Go back to the blank document. I did this in jQuery. That's what that little $sign is, obviously. Yeah, it could be something else, but it's jQuery. I basically created this variable which goes out and scans my web page for all of the web page elements with the to-be-fated class, and this .length lets me know how many there are. That was jQuery. The JavaScript way of doing it is var all lms, and you go document.get elements by class name, then you look for the to-be-fated class, and .length. So both these variable declarations are doing the exact same thing, one in jQuery, one in JavaScript. The JavaScript way is not cross-browser compatible. It doesn't work in a lot of Internet Explorer browsers, Internet Explorer 8 included, and it also doesn't work in a lot of older Opera and Firefox browsers. So if you want to interact with the class names on your web page somehow, it's better if you just use the jQuery version and not the JavaScript version. Just save that. All right. We've got actually quite a few things to talk about in the for loop, but I'm actually going to jump down to this triple equal sign, the comparison operator. The comparison operator is usually looks like this. If when you're first taught it, I use a triple equals. You're probably going to be taught to use a double equals, and it looks like this. There's a problem with this double equals. Let me see right here. So I'm going to create a variable here, and I'm going to call it me. I'm going to set it equal to 1. I'm going to step away from the single var pattern for a second. Then I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to call it u. But this time I'm going to set it equal to 1, but 1 in quotes. This type of variable is a number variable, and this type of variable here is a text string variable. So even though these variables look similar, it's quite obvious that I wrote them to be different because one is a number and one is a text string. If I get into a situation where I have to compare these variables to see if they're equal, even though I want them to be different, JavaScript will probably think they're the same. The fact that one has quotes and one doesn't matter. This is happening because the double equals sign will always check to see if the values are the same, but it won't check to see if the types are the same, and it's important that they are when you're using the comparison operator. If you use the triple equal sign, then it will check the type. So always use a triple equal sign. Even if you think you won't use it, it's better to have it in your code and not need it than need it in your code and not have it. And let us talk about these variables here. It's good to have all of your variables in one spot no matter where they appear in your code. And also, for the most part, JavaScript moves your variable declarations up to the top of your code anyway. So I'm going to do that with these var I and var fading lm variables. So I'm going to get rid of that semicolon, and I'm going to attach I to my single var pattern right here, and I'm also going to attach a fading lm to our single var pattern. And since it's now done, now I use a semicolon. So since I've attached these two variables to the single var pattern, they're attached to this var, so the vars down here can disappear at this point. All right, and let's talk about the incrementer. Let me go over here. I use I++. I++ is the exact same thing as if I was saying I equals I plus 1, and also another shorthand method, I plus equals 1. When you're taught to create for loops, you are taught to use this version. This version has many problems. The biggest ones are, one, it causes it causes security concerns on older versions of Windows, and also it can overrun your computer's memory, which you definitely don't want to do. So you should always, instead of I++, use one of these two. I'm a big fan of I plus equals 1. I just like the short-handedness of it, I guess we should say. So I'm going to use that instead. Okay, the condition. Oof. When I first learned the problem with this, I went, holy crap, this is how it works. Okay, I'm basically, remember the condition is saying it's checking to see, or it's saying in the context of our for loop, as long as I is less than all lms do stuff. And all lms, just as a reminder up here, it's all lms, it's definitely equal to 4, and we definitely have that here. However, we didn't put in the 4, we put in this all lms. Our for loop at this point has absolutely no idea what the value of all lms is. It's actually got to go out and find it. And it does so by first looking at our list of variables and seeing what it should be, and then when it realizes it has to go back to our web page and count all the page elements of the to-be-faded class, it does so, and then it plugs in the 4 here, and our loop runs. But get this, that first time when it went out and got the value of all lms, it didn't cache it in our for loop. In fact, every time our loop counts, it has to go through that process I just outlined. Seeing what all lms should be in our list of variables, and then going out to the web page and doing the work to find out that value. And that is just not good. The more your JavaScript has to interact with your web page like that, or shall I say, interact with the DOM, the slower your code's going to run. So we can enhance its performance by caching its value this way. I'm going to bring all LMs down here. Oops, highlight the wrong thing, sorry. I'm going to bring all LMs inside the parentheses of our for loop. And I'm going to attach it with all these beginning, this beginning variable declaration of I equals 0. So I could just comma separate it and put it in like that. And since we've already declared the value here, we definitely don't need to do it up here. So we can just get rid of this like here and just create our variable. I didn't give it a value up here, and I didn't give it for these last two. You should always, if you can, try to give your variables a value at the beginning of your code, but in this instance, it's okay that I didn't do that. So I've optimized my for loop. The problem is I just broke my code. If you recall in the last video, the last page element, that one should not have faded out. That one should stay on the page. So for reference, when we're talking about is this OMG, here's the fourth message. Let me just fire that up in a web browser here. Fire it up. So yeah, this is the message that should not fade out. Let's see if that's still happening. Actually, I can tell you it's not. So we've broken our code, but let's just speed through stuff here, blah, blah, blah. And we want this message to say, but it doesn't, it fades out. The reason is because in, basically the problem has to do with this lm no fade variable here. It's targeting the very, very last element, the one which we don't want to fade out. It has to, lm no fade has to calculate itself at some point, and it calculates itself here by subtracting whatever the value of all LMs is minus 1. JavaScript executes in the order that you write it. So in other words, before lm no fade calculates itself, it has to know what all LMs is. And it did until we moved its value down here. So that's a problem. So we're just going to move lm no fade inside of our for loop. Group R beginning variable declarations inside of our for loop together, comma separate them, put it there. Oops, I forgot to add an E. And since we've already declared this value here at the bottom, we definitely don't have to do it up here at the top anymore, so we can get rid of it. So let's see if our code works. Yeah, so far so good. And then the third one's going to come up, and the fourth one should appear, and it should not fade out. Okay, great. Our code is working. So that's it for the optimizations. I want to talk about this web editor I'm using. It's Sublime Text 2. It's an excellent editor. Best $60 I ever spent. The way Sublime Text 2, here it is, sublimetext.com /2 if you want to check it out. The way that it works is you can add something onto Sublime Text 2 called Package Manager, which allows you to install packages. Packages are just another word for plugins. There are a lot of plugins. There's a plugin for Git, there's a terminal plugin, there's an excellent code hitting plugin, and there's also a plugin called Sublinter. Sublinter is based on this code quality tool, JSLint, which is created by Douglas Crockford, who wrote JavaScript: The Good Parts. JSLint does exactly what it says. You paste your code in here, and then JSLint checks to see if it's of high quality. Depending on what code it catches, sometimes it will catch errors, sometimes it won't. But what it's mostly doing is checking to see if you invoke those JavaScript best practices that have been redefined that we discussed in the beginning. And I have that installed here. So we just said that it's better that you use a triple equals instead of double equals. Let's say I use a double equals instead. As you see, a little white border appears around my code. That's Sublinter telling me that, hey, your code isn't of high quality. And if you look in the bottom here, it says use triple equals to compare with 0. That tells me what line it's at and what the problem is. So I enter in the triple equal sign, and voila, everything works. All right, that's it. Thank you for sticking with me with this tutorial. I appreciate it. If you're not clear on what just happened here, let me know. Email me. Hit me up on my blog, kaidez.com, kaidez.com, and I'll try to help you figure out the problem. Thanks. Have a good one.